Hi, welcome to One Eye on the Page. I'm Scott. This is the weekly reading wrap up for the week of the 26th of February through the 3rd of March. Let's go and get started. I completed 3 books this week. I started this, there was 1 cat in here, and now there's 3. I completed 3 books this week. The first book that I completed was Company for Henry by PG Wodehouse. It is one of the books that I am reading to complete all the Wodehouse books so that I can do the 5-year battle PG Wodehouse. I think that I have 12 left now, and there's nearly 100 books. So this one is basically a bunch of people are coming to Henry's estate. It's a very large estate. He is a person of the peerage, but of course, being of the peerage doesn't mean you have a lot of money. And he wants to sell it to an American millionaire. The American millionaire also has a thing for, oh, I forget what it was called. Oh, he likes to collect these things that I'm totally blanking on right now. But Henry has one, but he can't sell it to him because it is considered historical in some way. The man, J. Wendell Stickney, also brings his aunt by marriage, or she was married to his uncle, and she's not quite up to the class level that he would prefer, but she and Henry seem to get along very well. Henry also has his niece Jane, who is engaged to somebody, but she meets Bill Hardy, who immediately falls in love with her because he's a PG Wodehouse character. And Hardy is friends with her brother Algie. Algie is one of the typical ne'er-do-well Wodehouse characters, kind of like Euchridge and some of the Drone Club members. This is going to be fun. Okay. Really? Come on, move along. There you go. Close enough. Just going to stay right there. Could you move? Thank you. All right. So Algie is a little bit like Euchridge, but unlike Euchridge, he doesn't really have any charm or charisma. Pretty much any time Algie was in the book, I was like, okay, can we do something else? I did not care for him. I like pretty much all the other characters, or even somebody like Stickney, who wasn't a character I liked and wasn't meant to like. I liked his actions in the book, but Algie is just like, I could do without this. I kind of figured it being one of those books that's a little bit harder to get. It's not a very well-known Wodehouse book. Even though it's more recent than, I think it was published in, well, I can't see here, but I think it was published like in either the late 50s or late 60s, somewhere around there. I think the late 50s, though. I thought it was still well written. Of course, even though it's in the late 50s, it's still in that timeless Wodehouse era where, you still have the early 20th century, the peerage and all that. And you could basically pick up a lot of Wodehouse books in the 50s and 60s and still feel like it was published in the 20s. So it was a good book. It wasn't a great book. Like I said, Algae really dragged a lot down for me. But I am going to give it a 3.5. I do think it's one of the better forgotten books so far. I've started another one already, and it has Freddie Widgeon, who is a Drones Club member, who I usually read about in short stories, but this one is a full novel, and I don't know that I can take him in a full novel, so I'm only like 20, 30 pages into it. I don't see it going too well for me, but we'll see. Uh, and that one is called Ice in the Bedroom. Although it does have a couple characters in there who have been in other books, basically small time crooks, who I do find interesting. So that was the first book I finished this week. And I finished 3, but finishing them up, well, I'll go into it. The next book that I finished was James Joyce, Dubliners. This is one that I, for the most part, listened to on audiobook. I did read some of it in this book, which I've had for a long time, but I have not read the book before. I have read the novella The Dead many times because it's something that's sort of a tradition for me around Christmas time. Is I read certain things. I read A Christmas Carol. I read some of the gospel. I believe Luke is what I read, and I read The Dead. And there are a few other things, like there are certain TV shows I watch or videos. Like I know, like in some Sweden, I believe in Sweden and maybe some other countries around there, they watch Donald Duck cartoons at Christmas. So that's something that I've incorporated into my Christmas traditions. So I have read The Dead many times, but I haven't read the other stories in here before. I do believe that I started it before, but for whatever reason, I never finished the book. It's got like 15 stories in here, mainly about just average Dubliners, the life under the surface. I do want to talk about a few books, like a few stories. Like the sisters, it's about a priest who died in his relationship with a young man. And it's like nothing is really said, but there's some doubts about the priest, but doesn't really get into anything. An encounter. This is. I don't want to put it across that this book is all like horrible situations between older men and younger boys, but Encounter is a couple of school children basically take off for a day and they encounter a man who comes across as pretty creepy. And it goes into a little bit about religion, because at one point they are mistaken for Protestants. So this is Ireland, and of course, in this time frame, the Catholics and Protestants. After the Race it's basically, this is a little bit about I don't want to say class warfare, but about class. One of the young men in here is hanging out with people who are pretty much more well-to-do than he, and he makes mistakes, and he knows he makes mistakes, and he knows he's going to wake up the next day and have to face the consequences of that, and yet he still continues to do what he does. One of the ones I do want to talk about, and I don't know why this one particularly stuck out for me, but it's called A Mother. It's about a woman who whose daughter is very gifted musically, and she gets hired to play piano in a production, and they sign a contract, and the contract is for, I believe, 3 shows. One of the shows gets canceled, and the mother uh, basically pushes for her daughter to get paid, and then she says if she's not going to get the money, she's not going to play. So then they pay her like half and say that they will pay uh, the rest, I believe, at the intermission or at a later period, and then later, and she puts her foot down, makes quite a production out of it, and says she needs to get paid. And the story basically is everybody is against her, and it kind of comes across as Joyce basically holding her up as a bad example. But I don't know if I'm just looking at it through modern eyes, but it's like, yes, this woman was obnoxious, but it seems to me, looking at it from the eyes of somebody who has seen like what Spotify does to artists and stuff, not that I'm doing a one-to-one comparison between these two, but she is a mother standing up for her daughter, and basically they're like, okay, we found somebody else to play piano, you're done, you're not getting paid, and this newspaper guy is going to put it out so that you will never, the daughter will never get work playing piano in Dublin. And it's like, and the mother, from the way I read it, is supposed to be the bad guy. And it's like, I don't know, because sometimes I read the story, and then I read what other people say about the story, and a lot of people are like saying, this is about her arrogance, and it's like, yes, she is arrogant and she is loud and obnoxious, but I'm more like, well, you said you were going to pay her for this, and now you're kind of like, oh, that's not my responsibility, talk to that guy. Oh, we'll talk about it later. And it's like, so that one, except for the dead, that one sticks out for me among all the other stories. But the book is mainly about just people, essentially middle class, lower class sometimes. There's one story at least about it's called Two Gallants, but they're not very gallant because they talk young maids into stealing from their employers. So some lower class, and then the dead. I am trying to read all of Joyce's major works this year. I am reading Finnegan's Wake. I have Ulysses, and I have the portrait, the portrait of an artist as young man, which I may read that one shortly. But the dead is just amazing. It's somebody, I don't know if it was Peter Straub who did it or if it was Stephen King saying it about Ghost Story, but one of them described it basically. Oh no, they described. I think Peter Straub in Ghost Story described, I believe, The Red Badge of Courage as a ghost story without a ghost. And I kind of feel that way about the dead, except there kind of is a ghost, sort of. It goes from this Christmas party, which is the same Christmas party that they do every year. They do the same things every year. And the main character, I'm sorry, I have so many Irish names in other stories. I can't remember his name. Oh, Gabriel. Uh, Gabriel has issues with a couple of women there, and kind of like, I don't know if I'm on his side or not, or why this one woman reacted this way, or why the maid kind of snapped at him because of this. But then it gets to the point where the party breaks up and everybody goes and somebody plays a piece of music and it affects his wife. And from the time when the party breaks up throughout the rest of the novella, that I think is really the best part of The Dead. It's a good story before then, and it's a story that the more you read, the more you get more things out of it. But really, what his wife says to him and how he reacts to that's really the crux of the story. And I have read that a lot of what Joyce writes about is paralysis. Uh, Basically, people getting stuck, and definitely can feel that in this one. I am going to give this one a 5-star, and I hope that the rest of Joyce lives up to that. I don't know if I'm going to give Finnegan's Wake a 5-star, because I think for me to give something a 5-star, I have to understand it. And so the other story, the other book that I am reading, so the last book I finished this week was The October Country by Ray Bradbury. I do believe I have read this before. I have this book I had, although I listened to most of this on audiobook. I have definitely read many of the stories in here. I think I have read this before, but yeah, the price on this was $4.95. So this was published a long time ago. Yeah, it looks like 1993. So I think I bought this in the early 90s, I'm assuming. And I think that a lot of the stories didn't resonate with me then that do resonate with me now. Obviously, ones like Small Assassin, I definitely remember that. In The Dwarf, uh, in The Jar, The Crowd. I remember that because I also believe that was made into a Twilight Zone episode, maybe. I remember those, but a lot of the other ones I don't remember. And what I really loved about this book is that I kind of feel like with Bradbury, my experience at least, is that you get one of two things. You either get like Fahrenheit 451, or you get Something Wicked This Way Comes, which I love Something Wicked This Way Comes, but that book and a lot of other Bradbury's other stuff is the very definition of a purple prose. It's just very overwritten and like, oh, flowery. And I was kind of expecting that here. And there are small segments of this, but honestly, what really sticks out to me in this book is, and this is a book, it was originally, I think it was originally published in 1955, but there are stories in it that were published back in magazines like in 1943. So stories written and published in the 1940s and 1950s. A lot of this is about mental health. It doesn't, although I do believe in one story it actually uses the phrase mental health. It doesn't talk about mental health in the way we may talk about it now, but it really is about mental health. The dwarf, uh, a dwarf who goes into a mirror maze to see this one mirror that makes him look tall, and the cruelty of the guy there who some basically gets offended that the dwarf tries to find any happiness, or that his uh paramour, I guess. I don't, it doesn't really say whether or not they're together, but it seems like they kind of are. How she feels for the dwarf, and so he does something about it. Also, a lot of these stories end uh, somewhat ambiguously. The dwarf ends somewhat ambiguously. I think I know what happened, but I also know I have seen other people who say, "Oh, I think this happened." But I think a lot of the stories in here are an example of ending something ambiguously isn't bad. I have talked previously. I'm currently doing a ranking of all Stephen King short stories. So he published, I think, 115 so far, and I'm still in the 100s now. So I'm talking about the stinkers. And a problem with some of the stinkers is King's ambiguous endings. I'm not a person who believes King always writes poor endings, but when he writes poor endings, he writes poor endings. And it's like, I don't know what happened. This one leaves some for interpretation, but I think the interpretation is good. It's not like, I don't know what happened and that sucks. It's like, I think I know what happened, and I can see that in my mind's eye. I can see something else, but again, it's the kind of eye of the beholder thing. Whereas there are some ambiguous endings, it's like I don't know what to do with that. It's just one, okay, you've brought me here, and now I can go there and see. Not really any purple prose. Also, something I had forgotten because I hadn't read a Bradbury short story in a while. The man is not overly fond of happy endings. He will do them occasionally, but if it's a short story, the chances of you getting a non-happy ending are pretty good. Oh yeah. Oh, the next in line about this couple that goes to Mexico, and this woman basically just essentially starts to have panic attacks, and her husband isn't understanding or willing to understand. And it's just like, that was the one that really stuck out to me. It's like, oh shit, Bradbury is just writing about mental health in this book. Uh, Skeleton, a man gets afraid of his own skeleton, basically. And it's one of those ones where, okay, it's going this one way, and then it just, woo, complete 180, something completely different. Uh, the jar, of course, one of his more famous stories, I believe. A man buys a jar from a traveling carnival, brings it home, basically becomes the center of attention. His wife, who looks down upon him, and his friend, and it seems like there may be something going on between the wife and the friend. They go and talk to the guy at the carnival and try to ruin things for him. Small assassin, woman believes that her child is trying to kill her. The crowd, yeah, man notices that same people in the crowd always seem to show up at accidents. Uh, Uncle Eonar and in Homecoming are kind of, well, Uncle Eonar appears in both stories. In the first one, he just seems to be a man with wings, and but he's a man with wings who has problem with night vision, so he can't go out at night and fly like he used to, and he misses flying, and it makes him cranky because he just can't go out flying in the day where people will see him, because apparently flying men with wings would be looked upon strangely. But he comes up with a solution. That one is, and I'm not damning it when I say it, but that one is cute. The wind. Man is afraid of the wind, thinks that the wind is trying to kill him. In Homecoming is the second one that Uncle Eonar appears in. There's a homecoming with a whole bunch of family members. Apparently, all these people are immortal, or pretty much. Some of them are vampires. They all have powers, so I don't think that they're all vampires. I don't quite get this, because Uncle Eonar is in here also, and we know that he can go out in the day. So, but there is one young man who doesn't have any powers, so he feels left out. And The Wonderful Death of Dudley Stone is not a horror story at all. It's about basically going to find a famous author who gave up writing. And there's nothing supernatural about it, but it was still just a lovely story. Yeah, I gave this one 5 stars also. I have started reading more Bradbury too, so I'll be finishing up more books of that. But that is what I've done this week. I have started a Russian novel on audiobook, The Master and Margarita. Should finish that in the next couple of days, so I will talk about that next week. And other than that, I'm not reading anything new except Ice in the Bedroom by PG Wodehouse. So hopefully I will finish some of the books that I'm working on. Until next time, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and I'll talk to you next time.